Welcome, everyone. This channel isn't just about me, it's about us. A place where we share ideas, connect, and grow together through every video. If you want to be part of a positive and supportive community, hit subscribe and let's build something great together.
Work in commercial real estate have for going on 22 years now. It's not glamorous work. Mostly it's spreadsheets and site visits and phone calls with people who are never satisfied. But it pays well and it got my daughter through college without debt, so I'm not complaining. 3 times a year, our firm sends me to regional development conferences. Chicago in the spring, Dallas in late summer, and Atlanta in November. Each one runs about 4 days. I've done this long enough that I have my routine down cold. Fly in the night before, set up the booth Monday morning, work the floor Tuesday and Wednesday, pack up Thursday afternoon, fly home Thursday evening. My wife of 11 years, Renata, had memorized that schedule better than I had. She could tell you which hotel I stayed at in each city. The Atlanta conference last November started like every other one. I flew down Sunday evening, checked into the Marriott on Peachtree, ordered room service, and called Renata to let her know I'd landed. She sounded a little distant on the phone, which I noticed but didn't press. We'd had a rough few weeks. Nothing I could put my finger on. Just a kind of cold static between us that I figured we'd work through when I got home. She'd mentioned once, vaguely, that she felt like I was somewhere else, even when I was physically present. I told her I'd been stressed about a deal that was falling apart. She said okay. That was the end of it, or so I thought. Tuesday afternoon around 2 o'clock, I was standing at our booth when I felt something pop in my lower back. I've had disc problems for years. Comes with the territory when you spend half your life in airport chairs, and every so often something just goes wrong without warning. This was one of those times. By Tuesday evening, I could barely stand upright. I went to the hotel urgent care and they told me it was a muscle spasm. Gave me a prescription anti-inflammatory and a muscle relaxer and told me to rest. By Wednesday morning, I could hardly get dressed. My regional manager told me there was nothing I could do for the booth in that condition and I should go home and rest. He'd have someone cover Thursday. I booked the first available flight, which got me into our airport just before 7 in the evening. I didn't call ahead. I know that sounds strange, but I tried Renata's cell twice from the airport and it went straight to voicemail both times. I figured she'd stepped out or her phone was dead. I sent a text saying I was on my way home and left it at that. The painkiller had worn off somewhere over Tennessee and my back was aching steadily by the time the cab pulled up to our house. I noticed a truck in the driveway I didn't recognize. A black F-250, clean, no markings. Not a contractor's truck, a personal vehicle. I sat with that for a moment before I got out of the cab. I let myself in through the front door. The kitchen light was on. I could hear voices coming from the living room. Low, relaxed, the kind of voices that belong to people who feel at home. I set my bag down quietly and walked toward the doorway. My wife was sitting on the couch. Next to her was a man I recognized immediately, her coworker from the architecture firm where she'd been working for the past 2 years. I'll call him my colleague since that's essentially what he was. Our firms had done business together once. He was the type of man who always seemed to be performing confidence. Late 30s, built like he spent serious time in a gym. I'd met him at her work Christmas party the year before, and something about the way he looked at her that night had lodged in my memory like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. They were sitting close. Not touching, but close in the way that told me they'd been touching and had heard me come in. Renata's expression when she saw me standing in the doorway was not surprise. It was something closer to a calculation happening in real time. She said my name like a question. I asked what was going on. She said he had just stopped by to drop off some work files. Her voice was steady, almost rehearsed. I looked at the coffee table. There were 2 wine glasses, a bottle of red, half empty. No work files anywhere that I could see. I told her I wasn't an idiot. That's when things shifted. She stood up and said she'd been wanting to talk to me anyway. He stayed on the couch, watching me with an expression I can only describe as entertained, like he was watching something he'd expected. She told me she knew about the woman in Chicago. I had no idea what she was talking about. I told her that. She said my friend, my actual best friend, a man I'd known since we were 19 years old, who I'll call my friend here, had told her. Apparently several weeks ago he had informed my wife that I was having an affair with a colleague at the Chicago conference, that I'd been doing it for over a year. I stood there in my own living room with my back in agony, trying to process what I was hearing. My best friend. A man who had been in my wedding. Whose kids I'd helped coach in Little League. He had gone to my wife with a story that had no basis in reality, and she had believed him without asking me a single question. Not one. She had taken that story, held it for weeks, let it fester, and had apparently decided that the appropriate response was to begin something with this man from her office. She said she was hurt. She said she had every right to be angry. I asked her why she hadn't come to me, why she hadn't said a word. I'd been home every weekend for the past 2 months. We'd had dinners, watched movies, gone to my daughter's fall recital together. She'd had dozens of opportunities to say something. She didn't have a good answer for that. The man on the couch decided that was a good time to stand up and tell me I should calm down. That things happen and people move on. I looked at him and said he needed to leave my house. He said he didn't think that was really my call. I want to be clear. I am not a small man, and I have a temper that I've spent my adult life learning to manage. In that moment, every trained instinct I had told me not to do what I wanted to do. Not because of him, because I could see, even through the pain and the shock, that losing control was the worst thing I could possibly do. Whatever was happening here, the way I responded in the next 5 minutes was going to matter enormously. I told him again, very quietly, to leave. He looked at Renata. She didn't say anything. He picked up his keys from the coffee table, gave me a look like he was doing me a favor, and walked out. I heard the F-250 start up and pull out of the driveway. Then it was just me and my wife standing in our living room. I asked her, calmly, to tell me everything my friend had supposedly told her. She did. It was detailed. Dates, the woman's name, supposedly a hotel in Chicago's River North neighborhood. It was the kind of detail that couldn't have been improvised on the spot. He had constructed this. He had sat down and built a lie with enough specificity to be convincing. And then I understood something. My friend had been trying to get closer to Renata for at least a year. I could see it looking back. The extra attention at gatherings, the texts I'd seen on her phone that she'd explained away, the way she'd started mentioning him more in conversation. I hadn't wanted to believe it then. I was believing it now. I told Renata that none of it was true. I told her I could prove it. Every conference I attend has a registration system, hotel key logs, dinner receipts. I'm meticulous about expense reports because I always have been. There was no woman in Chicago. There was nothing to find because nothing had happened. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said maybe we should talk tomorrow, when things had settled down. I said I was going to bed. My back was on fire. I took my prescription, went upstairs, and lay flat on the floor of our bedroom because that was the only position that didn't hurt. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. I didn't sleep much, but I thought clearly, and by 3 in the morning I had a plan. The next day, I called in sick to work. The first call I made was to my attorney, a sharp woman named Claudia, who I'd used for a commercial lease dispute 3 years earlier. I told her I needed to move fast, and that I needed her to understand the full picture before she said anything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always respected about her. When I finished, she said she understood, and we met that afternoon. The second call I made was to my bank. I didn't close accounts. That would have been premature and potentially problematic legally. But I documented every account, every balance, every joint asset, and I photographed statements going back 18 months. I sent those photos to Claudia. The third call was harder. I called my friend. He picked up on the second ring, sounding completely normal. Relaxed, asked how the Atlanta conference had gone. I told him I'd had to come home early. I let his silence hang. He said that was too bad. Asked about my back. I asked him why he'd told Renata I was having an affair. The silence on his end was a different kind of silence. Then he said he was just trying to look out for her. That he'd heard things. That he thought she deserved to know. I asked him where he'd heard things. He said he'd rather not say. I told him that the woman he had described to my wife didn't exist. The hotel he'd named didn't match any conference I'd attended in the past 3 years, and that I had 11 years of expense reports and travel records that could prove it. I asked him if he still felt like he'd been looking out for her. He hung up. I went back to documenting. That evening, Renata came to find me in my home office. She stood in the doorway and asked what I was doing. I told her I was gathering financial records. She asked why. I said because I needed to understand where we stood. She said she thought we should try counseling. I told her that was an interesting suggestion, and that before we talked about counseling, I wanted her to come sit with me and look at something. I walked her through everything: conference registration records, My hotel invoices from Chicago, 2 years running. The expense reports. I showed her the phone records app I'd downloaded that same afternoon, which let me pull a timeline of all calls and texts associated with my number during the Chicago dates she'd been given. Nothing. Not a single contact with the woman my friend had named. Then I asked her one question. Had my friend told her about this alleged affair before or after she'd started spending time with the man from her office? She didn't answer. I already knew. I'd been thinking about it since 3 that morning. He hadn't just wanted her to believe I was cheating. He had wanted to give her permission to do what she already wanted to do. Or maybe he'd given her the story specifically to manufacture that permission. Either way, he had used her grief and anger as a tool. I stood up, told her I needed some air, and walked out to the backyard. I sat there for about an hour. Then I came back inside, made some coffee, and called Claudia again. She filed the papers the next morning. The following 2 weeks were tense in the way that only a house with a dying marriage in it can be tense. Renata alternated between anger and what seemed like genuine shock that I was proceeding this quickly. She kept saying she needed time. I told her time was something I'd been giving her for weeks, while she made decisions without me, and I wasn't inclined to give more of it. She moved into the guest room. I stayed in our bedroom. We spoke when we had to about practical things, the mortgage, her car payment coming up, a repair the roof needed. My friend called twice. I didn't pick up. His wife, a woman I'll call my friend's wife, called me on a Thursday evening. I'd always liked her. She was steady and kind, and I had no issue with her whatsoever. I picked up. She said she was so sorry. She'd had no idea what he'd done. She'd found out because he'd left his email open on their shared computer and she'd read the correspondence. There were actual messages between him and Renata going back 8 months. Detailed messages. The affair between them hadn't started recently. It had been building for a long time. She was crying. I told her she didn't owe me an apology because she'd done nothing wrong. She asked if there was anything she could do. I said, actually, yes. I asked if she'd be willing to preserve those emails and share them with my attorney if needed. She said yes without hesitating. That documentation changed the legal picture significantly. Claudia told me that Renata's ability to contest certain aspects of the asset division was now considerably weaker. The correspondence established a pattern, duration, intent, the deliberate fabrication of the story about my supposed affair. My friend had put it in writing. People do the strangest things. The divorce proceedings took about 5 months. Renata did contest initially, but the correspondence her husband had stupidly preserved in a joint email account had a way of clarifying things. Her attorney advised her to stop fighting what she couldn't win. I kept the house. I kept the investment accounts I'd built before our marriage and the ones I'd managed during it. She received what was equitable under the circumstances, which her own attorney eventually agreed was fair given everything. My friend's wife filed for divorce from him 3 weeks after I filed for mine. I don't know the details of their proceedings, and I didn't ask. That was her life to manage. I ran into Renata about 4 months after everything was finalized. It was at a gas station of all places. She pulled up to the pump next to mine on a rainy Tuesday morning. She looked tired. She said hello. I said hello back. She said she wanted me to know she was sorry for not coming to me first. That she should have asked me instead of listening to someone she realized, in hindsight, had his own reasons for feeding her that story. I told her I appreciated that. She asked how I was doing. I told her I was doing well. I meant it. She nodded, and then we didn't have anything else to say, and she got back in her car and pulled out of the station before I did. I stood there for a moment finishing pumping my gas, and I thought about the 11 years and the recitals and the trips to Chicago and all the phone calls and the expense reports, and how much of a life you can build carefully only to have a single lie thrown into it like a match into dry grass. I thought about my friend, the man I'd known since we were 19, and how long he must have been planning this, and how little he must have thought of me to believe I wouldn't figure it out. And then I paid for my gas and drove to work, because there was a site visit in the afternoon and a lease negotiation that needed my attention, and the day wasn't going to stop for any of it. That's how life works. You close the bad deal and you move on to the next one. My friend is now dealing with his own consequences. His wife retained an attorney who, from what I understand, was considerably more aggressive than mine. He lost the house. He lost a significant portion of the retirement accounts. And because the emails his wife preserved contained explicit communications relating to the fabricated story he'd fed Renata, communications that crossed into defamation territory according to the attorney Claudia connected me with, He is currently facing a civil suit that I am told he will very likely settle rather than litigate. The man from Renata's office I heard through mutual contacts is no longer with the architecture firm. Whether that's related to everything that came out, I don't know and honestly don't care. What I know is this. I came home from Atlanta with a back injury and a bottle of muscle relaxers, found my life upended, and chose to move slowly and document everything rather than blow up in my own living room. That decision cost me nothing and gave me everything. People who plan betrayals rarely plan for what happens when the person they betrayed turns out to be patient. I've thought a lot about the moment I was standing in that living room looking at my wife and the man from her office with my back on fire and a bottle of muscle relaxers in my bag. And I keep coming back to the same thing. The most dangerous thing I could have done in that moment was exactly what I wanted to do. There's a version of that night where I lose my temper, where I say things I can't take back, or do something that hands the entire situation to the other side on a silver platter. I've seen that version happen to other men. They become the story. The anger becomes the headline and the actual betrayal gets buried under it. I wasn't going to be that, what my friend did, and I still have trouble using that word for him now, wasn't just a betrayal between two people who'd known each other for 20 years. It was a calculated thing. He built a lie with enough specific detail to be believable. He delivered it to the one person who had reason to be hurt by it, and then he positioned himself to catch her when she fell. That's not a crime of passion. That's something a person plans. And when someone plans something like that against you, the only real answer is to be more patient and more thorough than they ever expected you to be. I didn't do anything dramatic. I called my attorney. I documented what I had. I picked up the phone and let him hear his own lie reflected back at him calmly, with evidence already in hand. And when his wife found those emails on their shared computer, because he had been careless enough to leave them there, the whole thing unraveled on its own. I didn't have to pull a single thread. He had left threads everywhere because people who scheme against others always underestimate the basic administrative reality of what they've done. Renata said she was sorry. I believe her. I also believe that sorry doesn't rebuild 11 years, and that the right response to suspecting your spouse of something serious is to ask them, not to let someone else's story become your truth without a single conversation. That's not about blame. It's about what a real partnership requires. You owe the person you chose the dignity of a direct question before you make a decision that affects both of your lives. What I want anyone to take from this is something simple. Your first and best tool in any crisis is your own calm, not indifference. I wasn't indifferent. I was in pain for a long time after that November. But I didn't let the pain make my decisions. I made my decisions from the quieter part of my mind, the part that could still think in straight lines. That part kept me out of the story and kept me in control of the outcome. My friend is now facing a civil suit he will almost certainly settle. He lost his house. He lost his marriage. He lost 20 years of friendship with someone who would have done anything for him. All of that came from one lie that he told because he thought I wouldn't be paying close enough attention. I was paying attention. I just didn't say so at the time.